Carlos Santana just exposed a truth that Hollywood tried to bury for 50 years. It's not about the drugs or the affairs everyone knows about. It's about something much darker that happened when he was just a child in Tijuana. He's kept this secret through Woodstock, through his spiritual awakening, through his comeback. But now, facing his final years, he's finally talking. What he just confirmed explains his lifetime of pain, his suicide attempts, and his desperate search for redemption. This revelation will destroy how you see his entire career. Carlos Santana was born on July 20, 1947, in the dusty village of Autlán de Navarro, Jalisco, Mexico. His father, José, was a mariachi violinist who once led symphony orchestras and later performed with his band, Los Cardenales, around Tijuana and Southern California. His mother, Josefina, held the family together, even as they lived in near-constant poverty. The home was crowded with at least 6 siblings, and they struggled to keep food on the table. When they moved to Tijuana, José kept performing, but money stayed tight. That kind of pressure settled on Carlos's shoulders early. At just 5 years old, he was handed a violin and told to play like his father. José believed music wasn't just art, it was survival. Carlos tried, but the violin never felt like his voice. It sounded like someone else's dream. While his father taught him mariachi songs with precision, Carlos was secretly tuning into radio stations that drifted across the border. What he heard there hit different. B.B. King, T-Bone Walker, Little Richard, their sounds had fire and soul. At 8, he picked up a guitar, and something inside him shifted. It wasn't just the notes, it was the freedom. Still, he played both styles for a while, carrying the weight of his father's traditions while dreaming in blues. But dreams didn't protect him from everything. Between the ages of 10 and 12, a man from across the border began abusing him. The man brought toys, smiles, and gifts. He also brought silence and shame. Carlos said he felt like the guilty one, like it was his fault. When his parents found out, they tried to downplay it. They didn't know how to handle the damage. Carlos buried it deep, the way a child does when there's nowhere safe to put the truth. Years later, he said forgiveness finally pulled him out of that darkness. He called it liberating. But it took decades. In 1955, when Carlos was 8, the family moved to Tijuana for good. It was noisy, rough, full of life, and full of danger. José performed at fiestas while Carlos played violin at his side. But the same conflict kept brewing. Carlos was drawn to the electric sounds pouring in from America, while his father tightened the grip on tradition. By the time he hit his teens, the pressure exploded. At 12, he became a roadie for Javier Bates, and soon joined his band, the TJs. He switched to bass, since Bates already played lead. And it didn't take long before Carlos was lost in the rhythm of Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Howlin' Wolf, and James Brown. He was absorbing everything. Life at home was hard. In 1961, when Carlos was 14, his father left for San Francisco to find factory work, leaving Carlos to help support the family. It broke him. He played guitar on street corners, scavenged car parts to sell for cash, and was eventually arrested for petty theft. He was just a kid, stealing to feed his siblings. That same year, he came home to find his mother had taken $300 he'd saved dishwashing to buy a guitar and used it instead for his sister's dental work and overdue rent. She handed him back $20. Carlos took it and left. He returned to Tijuana, played in strip clubs, lived off tips, and survived alone. A year later, the family came back for him. He said they kidnapped him, shoved him into a car, and drove him north. At 15, he dropped out of school and returned to the strip clubs willingly. He was playing guitar every night for just $2 or $3 a set. The crowds were loud, drunk, sometimes violent. He once played during a shooting. These weren't safe places. Prostitution and gangs lingered behind every red curtain. But the music sharpened. His guitar became a weapon, a voice, a prayer. That's where he learned to pour out pain without speaking a word. His father, though ashamed at first, eventually saw it was the only way Carlos could earn enough to help. Carlos's first brush with marijuana came in a back alley after a long club gig. He was 16, tired, hungry, trying to cope. The drug offered escape, and soon it became a part of the underground culture he was surviving in. Years later, his band's managers would leave a giant joint on the table during lunch just to see what he'd do. He smoked it and said it was like entering a kaleidoscope. He'd once banned his bandmates from getting high during rehearsals because they kept forgetting songs. But something about that moment broke open a door. He started to see music not just as sound, but as color, as energy, as spirit. He didn't want to live in America. When he first arrived in San Francisco in 1963 to reunite with his family, he hated it. It was cold and foreign. He missed Tijuana's chaos. So he went back. But the pull of something bigger kept him bouncing between both cities. He finally settled in San Francisco for good, around 1965. He was 18. He washed dishes at the TikTok drive-in for $1.25 an hour. Slept there sometimes. Jammed on the street when he could. Played anywhere they'd let him. He called San Francisco a musical cornucopia. It was where blues, jazz, folk, and Latin collided. That same year, he became a U.S. citizen. He played for change on corners and snuck back to Tijuana to watch American bands perform, feeding his soul with every trip. He was absorbing two worlds, the grit of Tijuana and the acid-fueled experimentation of the Bay Area. He formed the Santana Blues Band in 1966 with David Brown and Greg Rowley. They played tiny clubs like El Convoy, sometimes just for food and tips. They argued constantly. People quit. People rejoined. But something kept evolving. Santana's fusion of Latin rhythm and blues guitar started to gather a following. In 1967, everything changed. He took LSD for the first time and felt his guitar speak back to him. He called it a spiritual awakening. He started blending salsa, blues, jazz, and rock into something no one else was doing. That same year, promoter Bill Graham saw them perform. He booked them at Fillmore West. Then he renamed them simply Santana. But Carlos was still terrified of big crowds. Childhood trauma clung to him. Graham forced him to keep going. He told Carlos to trust the sound, not the fear. It worked. The residency at Fillmore helped shape their sound and build momentum. By 1969, they were signed to Columbia Records. But Carlos was experimenting with heroin. He missed sessions. The label nearly dropped them. Some shows happened without him, but somehow he pulled it together. Their debut album was released in August 1969, just weeks after Woodstock. It sold over 4 million copies. Evil Ways became a breakout hit. At Woodstock, Carlos was so high on acid that he hallucinated his guitar turning into a snake. But he kept playing. And that performance, wild and raw, made him a legend. On August 16, 1969, Carlos Santana stood barefoot in the mud at Woodstock. His band wasn't famous yet. Their first album hadn't even come out. But thanks to Bill Graham pulling strings, Santana had a spot. What they didn't expect was how fast things would move. Carlos had just taken a hit of mescaline, thinking he had hours to come down before playing. Then suddenly the schedule flipped, and they were told to go on stage by 2 p.m. The drugs kicked in hard. He was sweating, eyes wide, guitar neck twisting in his hands like a living snake. But there was no backing out. Before him, 400,000 people waited. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move on their own. The band launched into an explosive 45-minute set, wild and raw, spiraling toward soul sacrifice. That one track changed everything. Michael Shreve, only 20, unleashed a 7-minute drum solo that pulled the crowd into a trance. Santana's face twisted, half in bliss, half in panic, as his guitar screamed through the muddy air. Somehow, it worked. The audience erupted. No one there had even heard of Santana before, but after that performance, they wouldn't forget the name. The footage would be replayed for decades, and in just under an hour, a career was born. But the high didn't last. Backstage, Santana collapsed. He vomited, shaking, heart racing, the trip now turning dark. He swore to himself then he'd never perform high again. It was too much. The chaos, the come-down, the terrifying loss of control. But that promise didn't stick. In the years that followed, the drugs crept back in. He relapsed more than once. Still, the Woodstock moment exploded like wildfire. When Columbia Records dropped the debut album just 2 weeks later, on August 30th, 1969, it shot to number 4 on the Billboard 200. Evil Ways climbed to number 9 on the Hot 100. Over 1 million albums flew off shelves. Santana was a star. Then came Abraxas, released on September 23, 1970. It wasn't just an album. It was a movement. It spent 88 weeks on the Billboard 200, 6 of those at number 1. Over 5 million copies sold in the US alone. Tracks like Black Magic Woman, Char Gypsy Queen, and Oye Como Va swept across the world. The blend of Latin rhythm, African percussion, jazz organ, and rock guitar created something new, something electric. Santana's solos danced over congas, fused with the soul of Gabor Szabo and Tito Puente. The album's name came from a mystical word in Hermann Hesse's Demian. By 2015, Abraxas was added to the National Recording Registry. Santana wasn't just successful now, he was historic. But behind the glory, the cracks widened. During the recording of Santana 3 between February and June 1971, cocaine started creeping in everywhere. Rehearsals became chaotic, arrivals got later, energy collapsed. Michael Shreve called it a shutdown of creativity. Santana tried to take control, demanding that the heaviest users be cut off. He warned he wouldn't tour otherwise, but it was already unraveling. On stage in Japan, Carlos snapped. He hallucinated demons mid-performance. He smashed his guitar. It wasn't just a bad night, it was a breakdown. Years later, in quiet interviews, he admitted that moment marked the start of a deep personal reckoning. That same year, a 16-year-old named Neil Schon joined the band. A prodigy, a fire starter. He traded solos with Carlos on No One to Depend On, but it didn't take long for tension to surface. Schon had ambition. He pushed back, argued, questioned. Rehearsals turned heated. One day, Carlos punched him. Schon stormed out. The music was still magic, but the chemistry was volatile. Their rivalry burned onto the records and stages they shared, inspiring future generations, but at the cost of peace. Then came the 1972 Japan tour. Stadiums packed with up to 50,000 fans. They flew on a custom Lockheed Electra nicknamed the Flying Turtle, carrying 12 tons of gear. But behind the scenes, Carlos's life was unraveling. Tabloids in the US picked up rumors of affairs with Japanese groupies. His wife Deborah read it all. They entered counseling. The performances stayed electric, but the gossip followed them home. Santana was becoming a global icon, but also a tabloid target, fighting to hold on to his marriage and his soul. In October 1972, the album Caravanserai marked a shift. Gone was the party energy. Now it was introspective, spiritual, jazz-infused. Only 3 songs had vocals. The rest drifted like meditations. It reached number 8 on the Billboard 200 but confused fans. Many turned away. Greg Rowley and Neil Schon left after the sessions. They couldn't connect with Santana's new vision. Behind all this, something deeper was surfacing. Santana started therapy. He spoke, for the first time, about being abused as a child in Tijuana. Memories he had buried for years. The pain he had never named. In 1972, Carlos Santana met John McLaughlin, and through him, he was introduced to the Indian spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy. By March 1973, he wasn't just following the guru, he had taken on a new identity. He renamed himself Devadeep, a Sanskrit word that meant the lamp, light, and eye of God. It wasn't a casual decision or a publicity move. Santana gave up drugs, alcohol, and many of the freedoms that came with being a rock star. Under Chinmoy's guidance, meditation replaced indulgence, and poetry and music became forms of prayer. The shift changed everything about his sound. Albums like Caravanserai and Illuminations carried jazz and classical influences, built around stillness and spiritual searching rather than rhythm and rebellion. But that discipline came with limits. Chinmoy disapproved of the noise and sensuality of rock music, and slowly the tension between Santana's creative fire and his guru's restrictions began to show. His faith soon turned into something darker and more consuming. Around 1973, he donated $150,000 to Chinmoy's ashram, more than $1 million in today's money, shocking those who thought they knew him. He urged his band to stay celibate, forbidding even public displays of affection, though privately he broke those rules himself. The contradictions eventually caught up to him. In 1982, Chinmoy sent him a letter filled with venom, calling him an ignorant sea drowner and banishing him from the community. The guru ordered his followers to cut all contact with him. The silence that followed was devastating. Santana later said that losing the group felt like losing a family, yet it also forced him to reclaim his own voice. He had married Deborah King in 1974, the daughter of blues musician Saunders King, and their first child, Salvador, was born the next year. For a moment, the marriage seemed to give him balance, but fame didn't stop testing him. 2 years later, Deborah found a stack of hotel love letters he had written to other women. They were detailed, intimate, and humiliating to read. She wrote about that pain years later in her memoir, Space Between the Stars, describing how it felt to love a man who was always somewhere else, on tour, in his own head, or lost in guilt. Santana admitted everything and said he wasn't in his right mind, claiming the spiritual pressure and constant touring had twisted his sense of reality. They reconciled, but the damage lingered like an invisible crack in the marriage that would never completely seal. During this same period, Santana and McLaughlin released Love, Devotion, Surrender in 1973, a record drenched in spiritual longing. It hit number 12 on the charts, but not everyone understood it. His concerts began to include poetry readings and meditations between songs. What once felt electric now felt distant. Even Bill Graham, the promoter who had believed in Santana since the Fillmore days, noticed audiences fading. Attendance dropped nearly 30% as fans drifted away, confused by the sermons and searching for the fire that had once driven the band. Musicians inside the group grew restless, frustrated by the forced spirituality that seemed to smother the joy of playing. Santana's next albums softened into jazz and soul, but the spark of the early years was gone. By 1978, the weight of it all nearly killed him. His faith had crumbled, his marriage was barely holding, and his career felt adrift. He fell into depression, and one night tried to end his life with pills. Deborah found him in time and saved him. But even deeper than despair lay something he had buried since childhood. When he was 10 years old, a man who had promised to help his family smuggle young Carlos across the Tijuana border into the United States began to abuse him. The abuse continued for 2 years, leaving scars he carried in silence for decades. It twisted his sense of worth, his view of love, and the way he trusted people. Only later in life did he speak about it, saying that forgiveness had been the only way to break free from the shame. He came to believe that survival itself was its own kind of prayer. By 1981, Carlos Santana's world was starting to tilt. His album, Zebop, came out that April under Columbia Records and carried the single Winning. But the victory didn't last. The record reached only number 25 on the Billboard 200, far below what his name used to pull. Columbia dropped him by the end of that year, ending a partnership that once felt permanent. To rebuild, he turned to the blues, recording Shango in 1982. The pressure, the disappointment, the silence of the stage, all of it sent him back to cocaine. The relapse wrecked his vocal cords, made him cancel tours, and left him in months of recovery, both for his voice and his confidence. The early 80s became the hardest stretch of his life, when the sound that made him famous suddenly stopped working. Behind that fall was something far deeper. In therapy, Carlos finally revealed what he had carried since childhood, that from age 10 to 12, he had been sexually abused by an American man in Tijuana. The man, who had pretended to help the family cross the border, used kindness as a weapon. For decades, Carlos carried the shame alone. By 1982 and 1983, that silence turned to despair. He tried to end his life 7 times, once even jumping from a bridge and somehow surviving. He said later, those years felt like being locked in a room with no door. When he finally began to speak about it, his openness made others find the courage to tell their own stories. He was trying to build a family through it all. His daughter Stella was born in 1979, but even her arrival couldn't stop the cracks forming at home. By 1984, newspapers were printing stories of his affair with a backup singer named Becky Johnson. Deborah Santana, his wife, stayed by him for years. But the damage lingered. She later wrote how invisible she had felt while holding everything together. It was a time when the music, the marriage, and the man all seemed to be slipping apart. In 1985, Beyond Appearances arrived, meant to be a return, but it became another fight. The producer, Ron Frangipane, wanted a slick pop sound. Carlos wanted fire. The album peaked only at number 67, and in the studio, the tension boiled over. He smashed equipment and stormed out, convinced the music had lost its soul. People there said it looked like he was trying to destroy the walls that boxed him in. After walking away from the guru Sri Chinmoy, Carlos drifted through another kind of darkness. By 1987, he had turned to Kabbalah, looking for light in Jewish mysticism. During the recording of Freedom, he lit candles, practiced rituals, and meditated through long nights. He said later those sessions finally helped him face his pain without running from it. For the first time, he felt forgiveness trying to reach him. But the world wasn't ready to bring him back yet. His 1992 album Milagro sold fewer than 50,000 copies worldwide and barely reached number 102 on the Billboard 200. His song Bella with Vernon Reid never made it to radio, lost in the grunge wave that swept the early 90s. By 1994, while touring Europe, he suffered a mild heart attack. Doctors said years of cocaine and alcohol abuse had scarred his heart. He described it as feeling like an elephant sitting on my chest. The attack stopped everything for 6 months and sent him into rehab. He said later that it was his wife Cindy who dragged him to the hospital and probably saved his life. In 1995, he tried again with Dance of the Rainbow Serpent, a 3-CD box set filled with rare tracks and Woodstock outtakes. Critics praised it, but MTV refused to air his videos, calling his image too ethnic. The set, released on August 7, 1995, held 35 tracks and rich photographs, yet it failed to chart. He had the history, but the world had turned its back. By 1996, even his marriage was crumbling. Deborah filed for divorce, saying the years of cheating, including an affair with a European promoter in 1993, had broken her spirit. Santana wrote an apology in the liner notes of his 1998 album, Brothers. "I failed Deborah and our family, and I am truly sorry." They eventually reconciled, but the scars stayed. In 1998, he began working on a new record with producer Matt Serletic, trying to create something bold. Lauryn Hill was supposed to join the sessions, fresh off her Miseducation fame, but she never showed. Studio time and crew costs piled up past $500,000. It nearly ruined him financially. Yet from that chaos came Supernatural, released on June 15, 1999. The album had 14 collaborations and changed everything. Smooth, with Rob Thomas, ruled the Billboard Hot 100 for 12 straight weeks, and Supernatural sold over 30 million copies worldwide, 11.8 million in the US alone. It was his biggest triumph, coming 28 years after his last #1. The success came with friction. Eric Clapton argued with him over the solo credits for The Calling, and Lauryn Hill sued over uncredited vocals on To Zion, settling for $5 million in 2001. But none of that stopped the wave. On February 23, 2000, Santana stood on the Grammy stage and made history, winning 9 awards in one night, tying Michael Jackson's 1984 record. He dedicated his speech to survivors of abuse, speaking softly but powerfully before 1 billion viewers. That same year, Maria Maria exploded, staying at #1 for 10 weeks and selling 1.3 million CDs in the US. The song's mix of Latin rock and hip-hop made it an anthem, though it drew fire from the NAACP for the gang imagery in its video and whispers of ghostwriters behind its lyrics. Years later, DJ Khaled sampled it for Wild Thoughts, proving its lasting pull. By 2002, he followed up with Shaman, another hit. The single, The Game of Love, with Michelle Branch, climbed to #5 and won a Grammy. But success carried new tension. He fired longtime drummer Chester Thompson during the 2003 tour, saying he lacked energy. Fans saw it as another sign that fame had turned inward. He divorced Deborah in 2007 and remarried drummer Cindy Blackman in 2010. Their connection brought Corazon in 2014, which debuted at #2 on the Latin Albums chart. Yet even they clashed on stage, like in Chicago in 2012, when Carlos stopped mid-song and walked off. Love, music, and pride were always tangled together for him. In July 2022, at age 75, he collapsed on stage in Las Vegas from heat exhaustion and dehydration. 10 shows were canceled. He said later it felt like his spirit had been drained. Therapy and rest followed, along with deep reflection. Then, in early 2025, he broke a finger that delayed his residency and collapsed again in April during soundcheck in San Antonio. He tested positive for COVID-19, and fans feared the worst. At 78, he said he felt at a spiritual crossroads, but wasn't ready to quit. That same year, a lawsuit pulled another dark curtain. He accused his former manager, Christian Garvin, of stealing over $1.6 million from him between 2008 and 2013. The case revealed 58 felony counts and a $260,000 bail. The money was tied to tour profits and spiritual donations meant for charity. Santana said the betrayal felt like a knife in the back because he trusted the man completely. It became one more lesson in how fame attracts both devotion and deceit. From the bridge he survived in 1983 to the stage he fell on in 2022, Carlos Santana's life has always swung between pain and redemption. Every collapse, every scandal, every chord bent into something greater. The man who once thought he had no voice left found it again in the sound of forgiveness, echoing through the same guitar that once saved his life.